Welcome everyone to the Generative Universe, ChatGPT and Alternatives, the world of generative models, where we'll talk about ChatGPT and explore alternative chatbot technologies. Generative Universe, talking about all the generative models or some of the generative models that are out there that produce human-like response to given prompts. And the leading generative model, and the first one that hit the marketplace, was ChatGPT, which is developed by OpenAI, which excels in its ability to understand and generate coherent responses and adapt to a wide range of conversation topics. Now, the alternatives I'm going to mention today are Claude AI, which is known for natural language processing capabilities suited to complex conversations, Bing Chat, which excels in providing accurate answers, leveraging Microsoft's extensive knowledge base, and Bard, which is a model developed by Google, designed specifically for creative writing and crafting stories. Why did I pick those three, you might ask? Well, what I found was I went through a few journals that I'll list in the bibliography later, and I kind of went through them for most of 2023. And what I found was, as I went through one journal, things sort of self-referenced other ones. And also, as I looked at each product, it tended to compare itself to other products. So it kind of narrowed it down to, Bard would compare itself to ChatGPT, ChatGPT would compare itself to Bing. And this sort of became the four that were out there. And even when I started looking at things like extensions, those extensions would typically run on two or three of them. And I found sometimes even extensions would run on all four of these. So this sort of became kind of the, I started out looking at about 12 of them that I was aware of. But this sort of became kind of, it sort of defined itself as the universe of products that I thought we should be sort of focusing on as alternatives to ChatGPT. The other reason that I sort of picked these ones were, I know that ChatGPT, a lot of people are running into problems with if you really want to use it, you have to use the paid model, which is $20 a month, and trying to find products where maybe you could get some of those features without going to the paid model. So not all of these things do everything that ChatGPT does, or certainly not what the paid model does, but they have a lot of those features. I'm not going to come out with a recommendation of these are the ones, use this one instead of ChatGPT. But I'm hoping that by doing this, I can focus your attention on the ones you should be sort of keeping an eye on, sort of in the near term. Certainly things are going to change over time, but these are the ones that I think are the ones worth paying attention to right now. They're also the ones where I think the money is. The expression follow the money. These are the ones where people or companies are investing their money. So when you talk about Microsoft and Google and Amazon, this is where the money is right now, as far as where people are putting money into research on these ones. I did want to mention quickly what I'm not going to talk about today, although even when you look at these things, these also sort of lead you back to these ones. So I'm not going to talk about things besides text. I'm not going to talk about how do you detect these products. Although even if you look at a detection product, it again leads you back to these are the ones we're going to detect from. I'm not going to talk about writing a good prompt, too much about the detailed usage of how to use ChatGPT or one of these products, and other things that I'm sort of fall off of my where I'm looking right now is I know that the Chinese have developed a lot of products that can be used, and there are also open source models. So I kind of stayed away from those for the time being, but they're out there. So, they're in the same way that Moodle was worth looking at. There are those kind of products out there as well. Just a reminder, GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. There's a definition there, but the key word is generative. And that's what distinguishes this from earlier AI products, in that what this model can do, what these products do that previous AI products didn't do before, is that it creates new content. It doesn't just pull up content that's already out there. It creates brand new content from the data that it pulls together. What is ChatGPT? Was the one that was developed first in 2018. There's a consortium of both nonprofit and profit entities. CEO is Sam Altman, who's worth paying attention to. It launched in 2022 with remarkable human-like conventional abilities and became viral. All of a sudden, we heard about this thing. And that in 2023, they introduced a subscription model because they found that people were willing to pay to get better access and better results. GPT-4 has a much bigger model size. I'm just reviewing this because this is sort of our base, is ChatGPT, before we start talking about what else is out there. It's got ChatGPT-4 has a trillion parameters compared to 175 billion in 3.5, and can process more information, handle more complex tasks. It's much faster, but it also, when you're using the bigger model, you get restrictions as to how many prompts you can run. So there are limits on that. This is a little bit more about it's more accurate. It has more capabilities as far as inputs and stuff. And they mentioned that when they asked the chatbots to take the bar exam, that 3.5 scored in the 10 percentile, and GPT-4 scored the bar exam in the 90th percentile. So that gives you an idea of how much more powerful it is. It also costs $20 more a month, but you get in addition to getting the faster speed, you also get access to features like browsing, which means that ChatGPT 3.5 cut off like in 2021, but ChatGPT 4 will also go, or should I say ChatGPT Plus, the one for $20 a month more, will also use the web to go out and find answers where their model cut off. That doesn't happen in 3.5. And you also get plugins, which is the nice feature. And I'll just show you a little bit of that, a little bit to demonstrate what that means. So let me just quickly, if we can just look at, if I can make the, okay, so if I'm here and I just log in as a regular customer, you'll see it shows you here that there's a GPT 3.5 and this GPT 4. If you click on GPT 4, then it says, hey, we want $20 a month. So there's a limit to what you can do there, and it tells you a little about what it can do. So I can do a query here, but then I'm going to have those limitations if I ask it something, like what is when will iPhone 15 be released? It has no idea. It doesn't know anything about that because it only goes to January 2022 or something like that. However, if I logged in with the newer one, it'll go out to the web and it'll say, Okay, I know more about that because I also have access to the web. And it also has, if I log out for a second, well, actually, I'm not going to do that. If I log in, it gives me some plugins so that I can go in and say, in addition to ChatGPT, I'd like to access this other database. I want to be able to do these other functions. I can show you, actually, if I do upgrade to Plus for a moment, let me just show you what some of those plugins look like. Just so you know, so all of a sudden you'll see, yes, I can get into ChatGPT 4. It even has a, lets me browse with Bing. I can pick which search engine I want to use along with the data. It lets me use DALL-E 3 right in from within there. If somebody else can be like letting people in late if they want, that'd be great. And it has plugins. Now these plugins here, there's a couple that I chose. I have one where I say, oh, in addition to browsing this, also go out and look into what amounts to the Internet Movie Database. But I can also go and browse plugins, which are, let's see, the plugin store. Okay, and these are just the popular plugins, but if I want to look at all the plugins, you can see there's 8 on a stream times 129. So there's all kinds of plugins that you can put into the paid version of ChatGPT 4. So if there's things here that appeal to you, I don't know if anybody has an idea of something they want to search for. Yes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How do we find the plugin store? Is that a plugin to ChatGPT or to a browser or to what?
The plugin store is if you pay and go into GPT-4, and then you go down to plugins.
Oh, it's inside okay.
Then you go into plugins, and then you can go to the plugin store.
Got it.
You don't see that unless you're in GPT-4. And then you go in there and you can do search or look at the popular ones. What's new here? Code library, I don't know. It's there's just a lot out here. It would take time. You can actually get into this thing for like a free trial or something and look and see if it has something that you think is worth it to you. I know when we were talking the other day, there were people in your panel that were saying this is worth it. You know, everybody should have this. This is just like it's ChatGPT is really not worth it unless you spend the $20 a month. And that may very well be true. And that may very well be that lab fees or whatever fees are out there is you should have this current version, you know, and I was sort of agreeing with, you know, that may very well be true. And it may be that this tool, unless you have this tool, the current version of this tool, it isn't. But the point I wanted to make is you have that stuff.
Gene, I see Jackie's hand up before you.
Yes, Jackie, what's the question? Oh, okay. Jackie?
Oh, it's in the chat.
Oh, it's in the chat.
Just a second, I didn't have my mic on.
Oh.
So I'm wondering, with the plugins, I install a plugin, does that just narrow the search or what is the plugins?
No, it expands the search. What it does is or makes the search, expands the search. Generally, the plugins add additional capabilities to ChatGPT.
Okay.
They don't narrow it. So that, for example, like I was saying, if I know there's another database out there that I want to include in my search, in addition to the model that I know they developed, which is a year or two old, I can say include that in the search. Or if it's a very specialized kind of thing I wanted to do, it could sort of in a way narrow it, but it's narrowing it only in the sense that it makes sure to include something that it might otherwise miss.
Gotcha.
So if there's like a health database or something that you say, I don't know if it's got that information, and I want to make sure that it includes that.
Gotcha.
Um,
So
it-
this is,
it-
I mean, if I can use an analogy, see if
Yeah.
this, so we have umbrella. And if I put in an umbrella and don't put any, filters, I get everything, right?
right.
Then when I click in on filters, it narrows it down to things that are specific areas that they've already done, but it excludes the other stuff.
Yeah. What you're going to do for that is in your prompt, you're going to specify exactly what you're looking for. That's what you're going to do down at the bottom here, where you say, I'm looking for this, and you be very specific about the criteria, and that's where you work on your on how you design your prompt, and that's sort of a whole other kind of science, where you develop that. In the plugins, that's where you're saying, I want to make sure that data from such and such source, some repository of knowledge, is included in ChatGPT in addition to what I know they have, because I know what they have may be a little old, or it might have missed something, say perhaps because that data is proprietary or something. So between the two, it helps you make sure you get what you want. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much, Gene.
Okay. So anyway, my reason for pointing that out is, if you can't afford or don't want to pay for the ChatGPT 4, there is another way around it, and that's to use extensions, to use browser extensions. And I kind of want to keep moving, but I'll show you what I mean by that. I'm not going to test them. If you use browser extensions, there are browser extensions that are specific to ChatGPT. And I'll show you that if I search the browser store for Chrome, for example, I can say ChatGPT web search, something like that. Let me see, what was the one I was looking for? Actually, I know what it is because it's in my slides, which I'm going to take a peek at, even though I don't want to bring them up. You can see it now. I'm not going back into the slide presentation, but there's a YouTube summary with ChatGPT and Claude. If I go back for a second into my, here, so if I say web summary with chat, I think I got that right, ChatGPT and Claude. Yeah, see, I read it wrong. What did it say? See if anybody can remember what I said. Okay, YouTube, that's not the one I wanted. There we go, web chat GPT. See if you can remember those three words. Okay, if I go here and I'm looking in the extensions for Chrome, and what were the three words again?
Web chat GPT.
GPT. Then you start getting these things like superpowers for ChatGPT, ChatGPT Toolkit, ChatGenie for GPT, more extensions. Here it is, this one, for example, ChatGPT with internet access. Augment your ChatGPT prompts with relevant web search results through a web browsing. Those Chrome extensions, which by the way will run on other browsers, allow you to use the cheaper version of ChatGPT and still search the web. Because if it's a Chrome extension, you don't have to buy ChatGPT Plus. So it's just a trick that I found that sort of gets you around the having to buy the more expensive one. Another one I found was, I'll just go back to this. Okay, presentation. Here's one that I like, YouTube summary with ChatGPT and Claude. This you can use without having to upgrade your ChatGPT. And this one, I'll do an example if I can. So let's say that I am in, okay, here's President Biden delivers remarks on the Israel-Hamas conflict, okay? And let's say that, see, who am I signed in as now in ChatGPT? I'm signed in. Let me sign in and log out and sign in once again as the user, as a user who doesn't have the, okay. But let's see now, if I look at my extensions, I should have something here called YouTube Summary with ChatGPT and Claude. Notice it also works on Claude. Summarize YouTube videos, web articles, and PDFs to save time. Okay, so now I have that extension. I can go into this speech and I have an extension here. So this lets me write the parameters. I can go back to that extension here. Pick any one I want. Let's see, just pick this one. And I have an extension here. You can see it's that. And it'll do a transcript. And at the very end of the transcript, that's not a very good one. Summarize the following 5 bullet points. That one didn't work so far. No, that one's not very helpful. Let me just try one more. I've seen this one work before.
More than 1,000.
Oh, I know what.
Okay.
Okay.
I just got slaughtered
I didn't finish it.
in Israel. Among them, at least 14 American citizens killed.
Okay.
Parents butchered using their bodies to try to protect their children.
At the very end of the ChatGPT, you'll see it summarized it into 5 bullet points. Okay, so that's an example of something where you can get, and it lets you, if you go into here, this is where it lets you set, which model you're using, what language. You actually can write the ChatGPT prompt in here. And you can give ChatGPT, if you can give them examples of what you want it to look like. And it says how to chunk the video because it'll do 20 minutes in length, but it tells you, etc. Anyway, that's an example of, I know that it's a Chrome extension that will let you extend the value of the cheap version of ChatGPT. Now, I have 20 minutes left. I wanted to show you, because that's the point of this thing, that's ChatGPT. But a couple of things else to note is, what's the future of ChatGPT? ChatGPT 5 is coming. It's going to have this GPT bot, which goes out and crawls the web, looking for data to include in it. Also, an interesting thing I saw that in the next 10 years, Sam Altman wants OpenAI to include AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, which he says is representation of generalized human cognitive ability in software, a system that can perform any task that a human being is capable of. So that's what they think. In 10 years, their software will be able to do anything you can do. Okay, alternative 1 to ChatGPT, Google Bard versus ChatGPT. Bard accesses the internet in real time. ChatGPT only went to September 21st. Can recognize spoken prompts. ChatGPT does not. You can export your information to Google Mail, Docs, etc., and it browses the internet. Delivers up-to-date travel recommendations. Oh, that's nice. Okay, so let me just go ahead here. Bard. I should also say that Bard, am I sharing? I'm sharing. Good. Bard will interface with all these other Google products, which is kind of cool. How do you get into Bard? Does everybody know that? So you go to the Bard website. And again, let me get up here. So let's go to Bard. All right, and that is what? If you had to guess, it would be bard.google.com. Okay, and there it is. Oh, it was just updated. Nice. So here's something. I was trying to see how, one thing Bard does is it automatically lets you do a Google search right there to see how accurate your answer is. So that I can say, I was curious about this. I said to Bard, and I wasn't happy with the results. I said, one thing is you're not necessarily using this thing for a search. You should be using this thing to sort of create things for you. Does anybody have a good prompt I can use? Because I'm not being all that imaginative about that. Something they'd like Bard to write. Linda?
Well, I can give you an example that I had told Ellen about
Okay.
I use the Chat GPT for it. It's not very specific, but for my police and society class, I asked Chat GPT to write 5 different scenarios of violent crime incidences that police respond to.
Okay. What's the best verb for that? All right.
Saying what are? What are or
Please create.
please
All right.
create.
Yeah.
5. So in each case, they give you, if we start at the top, it gives you a scenario. Homeowner calls the police, reported break-in. The homeowner arrived home to find the back door had been forced open. Several items had been stolen, including TV, lamp, and jewelry. Police response. The police would respond to the scene and secure the area. Interview the homeowner to get more information about the crime, such as what time it occurred, what items were stolen, and whether the homeowner saw or heard anything suspicious. All right. Do you like that as a
Yeah.
format?
And maybe what I would need to do in the ask is, because I don't want them to say what the response is going to be. I guess it's, what would you as an officer do?
Okay.
Here's a scenario, what would you do?
So you want the students to come up with what you should do, or do you want
Yes.
the chat? Okay, so then maybe you would just say, create 5 different scenes that police respond to, do not include, and then just new sentence, do not include the police response. You know, and then, because I've done mine as 2-sentence prompts like that, and that has been helpful.
Okay, so I just said, do not include I didn't rewrite the whole thing. I just said, do not include the police response.
Mhm.
And then these are just a few examples of many different crime scenarios police respond to. Crime can take many different forms, and it's important for police to be prepared to respond to a variety of situations. So it listed these, and it gave you 3 examples of each type
That
of
seems a
crime.
lot better than the first one. Because the
Yeah.
first one only had what?
But all
one
you had to do,
example,
but the nice thing is you interact with these things, so you don't have to start over. If you don't like their response, you can qualify it, and it'll make changes to it. The interesting thing would be to see what would ChatGPT do given the same query. So it's create 5 different crime scenarios that police respond to. So if we just said here, yeah, they didn't start with, they didn't give the police response to begin with. And they sort of wrote a paragraph describing each one. So you would have to you could play with either of these and decide, which tool gives you a better response. That I like to think is a good use of the information, I'm giving you here is, try each one of these and see which one is helpful, and maybe have, pick when you hit and pick 2 and say, I'm going to use these. Or when ChatGPT is down, which is what happens, which one will I go to? But I mean, that's Bard. Bard right now is not charging for anything. There's discussion of a paid version of Bard eventually, but right now Google is just trying to get people to use it, because this is one of the places where they're putting their money.
I gotta go, but thank you so much, guys.
Okay. You're welcome.
Thanks
And
for coming.
Good to see you, Jackie.
good to see you, Jackie. Hope you can get to see the rest of this. This was just something cool that I liked, that Bard features not in ChatGPT, and we mentioned this before. You can check your results with Google search. If you don't think the answers that you got were correct, and that wasn't a factual one, I asked Bard to name the chancellors of UMass Boston from its inception, and then I pressed a little button here. If I've got let me get the Bard screen up again for a second, which was, let's go back to Bard. There's a button here. When you get to the end, you see this little G at the end of the response? I asked for that. I asked him to name all the chancellors, and then I clicked this G, and Bard was totally wrong. It was like, gave a totally wrong answer about who the chancellors were. It made up people that I never heard of, and it totally got like the terms wrong. It had like Motley's term, when Motley came and when he left, it got that all wrong. It was like, try that. I don't have to try that for you now because I did it. And it was like, where did you get your information? Because when I clicked on the G, it went right to the UMass Boston website and told, and said, here are the right answers.
Well, that's intimidating.
Yeah. So it's like, but on the other hand, it said, they put this button here. They're like, it says double check response.
Do you think that that button is feedback to the software developers to train the model?
It could be, and it also asks, then, I mean, they also want you to ask you whether it was a good response or a bad response. So,
They're training the model through using.
Yeah, they are
yeah.
training the model here.
They
and they want your, and because some things that you ask it are factual search type answers, and other things where you say to it, write me a poem or whatever, it isn't, but when you go ask it a factual question, they say, go double check your response. We have this right here, This thing here is like, is this factual? I don't know. Let's see, what would you check this against? Search on Google. Evaluating Bard's statements. Well, it doesn't quite know where to go for that. What it does though is it gives you some searches that you can do in Google to look for similar information. Anyway, that was sort of an interesting feature of it. What I liked about what's funny about this thing here, where it talks about the different things that Bard has that isn't in ChatGPT. This slide here, I used the button in my PowerPoint that where it says design,
Mhm.
which uses AI, and all I had were these things. And for check your results with a Google search, it put a magnifying glass. For voice enabled prompts, it put this. For export, it put this. So it came up with these just from my putting those words. It came up with these icons.
Are those extension features?
No, but do you understand what I'm saying? Maybe I'm not clear, but what I was trying to say is, if you were using, if I go to here, I'll go
What
back.
came up with that? PowerPoint? You're saying PowerPoint came up with
What I'm
that?
saying is when I put these words in here, and then I click designer, right? And I got all these things here.
Yeah.
It chose these graphics
Oh, I see.
to
Mhm.
represent my language. And
It
I
took
thought,
your text and put it into
when it
icons.
saw search, when it saw that I had written check your results with the Google search, it said a good graphic for that would be a magnifying glass.
You're saying PowerPoint created this slide from text prompts.
From my
Your
language,
text. Yeah.
PowerPoint decided these would be good graphics for his text.
I'm impressed.
And I thought that was pretty smart, and it picked that. But PowerPoint is coming up with these different.
Do you want to get back onto the mainline topic of the?
Yes, I did, but I just wanted to tell you, I thought that was ingenious. Here is we already did use identical terms for that. Next one is Claude. Anthropic was started by some ex-OpenAI employees. They integrated with some products, and in July 2023, Claude was released to the public. That's why you've just heard of it. This I just wanted to share. Amazon in September 2023 invested $4 billion in Anthropic. That's why it's worth knowing about Claude. Okay. So, and Claude we don't even have to run another comparison, but just to know, it's another one. Open a Claude account, see what you think of the results. Okay.
Mhm.
I'm just saying, here's this little sentence here. This is what tells me that Claude is worth looking at, because if Amazon says, hey, let's throw $4 billion at this thing, all right, that to me means
There's some research money on it.
it should be in the game. And the fact that it also came from some OpenAI employees, yeah, okay. That's really all I have to say about that, other than you should try it. And if you go to Claude AI, you get an account. Probably wondering what Microsoft is up to. Well, Microsoft threw $10 billion into OpenAI. So did they do that and just become part of OpenAI? Well, no, not exactly. I got to tell you this, because here's the thing where they said, I saw this thing, I was in Microsoft, and they said, free ChatGPT-4. And I thought, wow, I can get free GPT-4 in Microsoft. And I went in there and I signed up for it, and I went into it, and it's like they gave you 10 uses. And after that, they wanted you to pay the $20.
Bait
It
and
was like,
switch.
you bastards, it's like, I thought they were giving it away for free. I thought I'd found a way to find free GPT-4, but no. They have a sidebar that runs GPT-4, which is actually kind of cool, so that you can do things like you can make the sidebar summarize what's on the page. So you have a running sidebar that summarizes what's on your web page. Bing Chat, you know how to access Bing Chat? It's basically you go into, now this is interesting.
In the
If you
Bing browser.
If you go into, well, here's one thing. Let me try this. If you go to Microsoft Startup, okay, let's find out where that is. MicrosoftStart.com, all right? And I click in here, or I click on this little Bing thing. I'll get this Microsoft Bing, all right? Now, you know this is how you get into Bing, right? But what browser am I in?
Oh, right. Why did I think? Oh, You're in Chrome.
I'm in Chrome. So it's the thing to know is that you can run Bing if you want to from Chrome. And it's basically the same thing. But the the other thing to know is that the way you want to get there is to get to this screen is to run this Microsoft Startup, which I think, how did I get to that? It's MicrosoftStart.com, right? Go to that, and that's what's going to get you that thing here, where you can click on the Bing button and you get to that. Okay, so I'm trying to just get through these things so we'll have this stuff online. I'm just about done. This is my bibliography where I say, these are the journals that I went through kind of for the year. AI News, AI Magazine. I don't even know if you can read these things.
Yep. I can.
And I also went through Medium as an archive of their articles on AI. And then these with just the vendors that I went through, that should be there you go. That's kind of where I went through to get the information that I used here. And it's actually only $12.59. So for those of you who've hung out for all of this, my goal is really to say that these are the ones that I've kind of found that are the ones that are kind of there right now. They're in the ball game. They're the ones that are there. There's the ones that kind of reference each other as the competition. They're the ones that I've got, the big money from, Microsoft gave them money. Google obviously has its own money. Microsoft, kind of started with, gave a lot of money to OpenAI, but then they used that and they ran off with Bing. And Anthropic is now not only took from OpenAI to begin with, but they've now got the Amazon money.
But they're different language models, correct? I mean, the software is different.
The software is different as far as the software.
The training data different.
But Bing is really using the GPT-4 model and they have access to that because they put $11 billion into OpenAI. So they're really sort of sharing the same language model. Bard is using, I'm trying to think of what it's called right now, but Google has its own language model.
But if they're sharing a language model, why aren't they the same?
Because they're, I can't think of what it's called right now, but
they've had the same training data put into them?
It's the same data. It's the same data, but I'll have to get back to you on the name for it. But there's a name for whatever the sort of the front end of it. The programming that accesses that training data is different.
Which one is the most up to date in terms of the training data? Because you mentioned that one of them didn't have something that had happened this year because it was created last year.
Right. I mean,
Input data.
well, OpenAI, unless you have the data for 4, you're pretty old. But even so, if you want newer data, you got to go with either, I think, Bard or Claude, because not only is the data newer, but they're also, by definition, I think, accessing the web. So they include the web as part of their model.
In part of the one return that it gives you, or you have to go
Yeah,
separate?
sort of automatically. The Chinese are doing something similar, and there's some pretty big names in terms of Chinese companies that run these things. It just, I don't know, maybe if it's a personal bias or I don't know what, but just, when you're entering your own data into a company that's run by China, that's making me nervous somehow.
Well, let's not go to a political thing. And
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Let's not go
can,
there.
right.
And the same thing with an open source. But I'm just saying, of the companies that we sort of deal with in our daily lives right now, to be dealing with, Google and Microsoft, OpenAI, which also has been, funded, and, some of them are like, it's sort of incestuous in a way between some of these anyway, because Google has its hands in some of these other ones. Microsoft, they all sort of have some relationships with each other. They're not like pure as far as that goes.
Do you have any closing remarks that you'd like to leave us with?
Yeah.
Wrap it up.
I mean, my closing remarks would be, I would say that if this is the kind of tools that you want to be working with, and you see value in these, that I wouldn't just say, stick to ChatGPT and, go forward with that and be content with that. I would say try these other 3, run some of the same types of prompts that you would run through OpenAI that you've been happy with or not happy with. See what kind of results you get. And if anything, pick at least one kind of as maybe your backup, or, just to keep an eye on. I'd say sort of keep an eye on them all, but maybe at least at this point, see if there's another one that you can, when you do something, run a comparison. Just sort of, maybe have another one that, if you're using it for something important, it's worth running it through a couple of these just to see, see
Do you
the
have one that you
results.
recommend over others for non-technical faculty who are going to watch this, who don't want to be running tests and doing this and that?
Easiest thing to run is Bing,
Bing.
because Bing is right there in your browser. Bard, you have to get an account, and Claude, you have to get an account. Bing,
Okay,
you don't need an account. That's probably the easiest thing to say, is that of all of them, you go to Microsoft, you go to the browser, in fact, the easiest thing is you either go to the Edge browser,
Mhm.
or, like I said, there's a little workaround to use in the Chrome browser, if you know it. But if you go to the Edge browser, it's right there. You start using it. It gives you sources for the days for what it comes up with. When you do something in Bing Chat, it also checks the web and gives you sources for it. So, for me, it's the absolute easiest thing to do is to use ChatGPT and Bing, or use Bing. And
Okay,
and
so-
Bing is already in fact, Bing is already in ChatGPT 4. So if you had to pick one, you might just use Bing because it's so user friendly.
So is that a good place to stop,
I think it
you
is.
think?
Yeah.
Right. So we thank everybody who joined us. We thank everybody who's watching. And we hope to continue the conversation.